stem cell match. We need your help.
A simple swab is all you need to register on the National Stem Cell Database. You could be the one to save a life. Find the hero in you.
Sports fans know Sundays are for football. That's why you need NFL Sunday tickets. With NFL Sunday Ticket, you'll get every live game, every Sunday afternoon, all season long. Follow your favorite teams and players live in HD. Order NFL Sunday Ticket for only $199.99. Get up to 200 regular season games. Call 1-888-ROGERS-1 today. This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Brian Williams, and I'm the Tourism Development Officer with the town of Gander. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to the Untold Stories event. This is a commemorative event, and you'll hear stories tonight that have not been told to the public before or known in the media. If you have maybe a tissue or a Kleenex, you may want to use it tonight. This is intended to be respectful, but a little bit of fun and definitely informative. In the 20 years since 9/11, Gander area has been known for acts of compassion and kindness towards our 6,600 unexpected guests. Well, to us, we're only doing what people should do for those people in need. The residents of Gander and the towns of Gambo, Appleton, Glenwood, Lewisport, and North Arm all hosted passengers in their community halls, in their schools, their churches, and their homes. Even more communities assisted with donations to food, bedding, and more. Our Untold Stories event will bring you some of these stories from the people who were there, who were a part of it all. Though there are probably thousands of stories to be told, we have 7 stories tonight, stories that will commemorate the kindness of humans and the friendships that were made between strangers. Before we proceed, I would like to acknowledge the attendance of representatives from the U.S. government who have come to Gander to take part in our 20th anniversary commemoration weekend. They have a little bit of a delayed entry. I'll give you their names now, and then I'll announce, of course, when they arrive. We have Deputy Chief of Mission Catherine Brucker from the U.S. Consulate in Ottawa, Consul General Lyra Carr from the U.S. Consulate in Halifax, Brian Beddig, a first responder at the Pentagon during 9/11, and Marcia Setzeller, Public Affairs Specialist for the U.S. Consulate in Halifax. Welcome to Gander, to everyone who has never been here before. I've spoken to a few of you in the audience earlier today, and for some of you, this is your first time in Gander, and some of you have lived here your entire lives. So welcome everyone tonight, and hopefully you'll meet some more people, maybe some more friendships, just as we did 20 years ago. Now, as you came inside, you noticed the coat check right here. I don't think there's too many winter coats being worn tonight. It's kind of warm. Thank goodness for air conditioning. Town of Gander firefighters from Gander Firefit have volunteered to assist. Gander Firefight is a tight, small group of firefighters who compete in regional competitions. And I think the next one is next year in 2022. So very much thanks to Gander Firefit. I'd like to request that all phones be set to silent. So if you haven't already done that, please set your phones to silent. Photography is permitted. have at it. You want to take pictures, go right ahead. However, do respect your neighbors with your bright screens and your elbows, you know. I also want to note that the bar will be open afterwards for about an hour, and the gift shop will be open there as well. Masks can be removed while you're seated. However, once you do leave and exit the International Lounge, your mask should go back on. Now, our special guests this evening are seated before you. A good-looking, fine bunch they are, I think. And the winner is? No. And I want to extend a big welcome and a big thank you to each of you for coming here. Each of these people have responded to my calls and my emails and my texts, sometimes lots of them, and graciously have agreed to take their time and come here tonight to tell their particular story. Their stories are warming, they're personal, and they're thought-provoking. Nearest to me, we have Don Baker from Gander. Don is a local artist and author. Next to Don is Betty Clark. Betty is the current mayor of the town of Lewisport. And of course, Lewisport was one of the several towns which assisted passengers. Seated together are lovebirds Des and Jean Dillon, who have volunteered with the Red Cross, I guess, for decades now. And we have Betty Moulton, of course. Betty's in the red there. She's also volunteered long-term with the Red Cross. Sheldon Kirby, community of Norris Arm. Norris Arm is, I guess, about an hour from Gander. Sheldon is a former teacher at Hillview Academy, and he has that's a heartwarming story. Then we have John Watton. John is from Gander, and he's the bishop of the Anglican Church, Bishop John. And last but not least, right on the very end there, I can just see you, Karen Vascanyan from Florida. And Karen was a crew member of Continental Flight 5 and first visited Gander on September 11th, 2001. Each guest will relate their unique story as they lived it, and nothing tonight has been scripted. For some of them, even I don't know their stories, so it's truly untold. Now, once everyone has spoken, we will have a question and answer session to take feedback from the audience, because you may have further questions. And when it comes to that, young Matt, who's walking by right here, he will bring you a microphone. He will hold it so you don't need to cross-contaminate, and you can ask your question of anyone that you choose. Don Baker, next to me. Don is our first speaker this evening.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. If my husband were here, he would say that I probably don't need the mic. Just saying. I have several little stories to tell. This is really not my story, it's my family's story. As you know, as Brian just said, I am a children's author and a writer, and Flanker Press published my book, Commander Gander Goes to Come From Away, in 2019. And because of that, I was asked to be a speaker at the Beyond Words tours. And I did that the summer of 2019 several times, and it's because of that experience that they asked if I would come and share the same story that I told then tonight. So I'm going to try to do my best to tell the story the same way that I did a few times for small groups of people on the Beyond Words tour. 2001, my husband was still trying to convince me that golf was fun. It really isn't, but I was letting him try to convince me. So that morning, my husband is an air traffic controller. He's retired now and works as an air traffic controller consultant. But that day, he was expected to go to work later in the afternoon. So that morning, we dropped our daughter Samantha off at school, and we went down on the Gander golf course. And it was blissful, other than the golfing. It was sunny, it was warm, it was lovely. We spent the morning together. No cell phones, of course, no way of anyone getting in contact with us. And then we went into the golf club at the end of our golfing, and that's when we began to realize something was horribly wrong. Everyone was sitting around a television screen that they had, and my husband, being an air traffic controller, he was talking to another air traffic controller, and they were saying, oh my goodness, how could something go so wrong that a plane would hit, one of the towers? And while they were discussing this, unfortunately, we were watching live when the second one hit. And then we knew something was very, very wrong. So we left immediately. My husband checked in with work, and I went home. When I got home, I started to watch it on television, and I was simply horrified, heartbroken, dismayed, every possible word that you could think of. All that day, I was in sort of a trance, staring at the television, thinking, how is this happening? Why is this happening? It was horrible. So when I started to hear that there were planes landing in Gander, and the first thing that I heard was there may be as many as 10,000 passengers. We were told that because somebody counted the aircraft, and they worked out the maximum capacity of each aircraft, and they said it could be up to 10,000 people. So thank goodness I had a purpose. I started to clean. I cleaned the house, I did all the laundry, I put all the bedclothes out on the line, and I thought, okay, people could be coming here to our house, so I have to get ready. The next day, people started to arrive at the shelters, and for some reason, and I think it may have something to do with my age at that time, and being what we used to delicately call that time of the month. But one of the very first things I did was I found myself in Shoppers Drug Mart, which was in the Gander Mall at the time, and I thought to myself, I can manage $100. I'll spend $100 before taxes. And I went down the aisle and I picked up a variety of whatever I could think, feminine protection that someone might need. I took the 2 bags, and my daughter was a student of Gander Academy. I was used to the teachers there, so that's the first place I went. I walked into Gander Academy, and a friend of mine, Joanne, who was teacher librarian there, she met me and she said, what have you got? And I said, well, I wouldn't want anyone to be caught, because I was thinking if they're on the plane and they're only expecting a 4 or 5 hour or 10-hour flight even, and they're on the plane all night and now it's the next day, someone might need some of this. And she shook her head and she said, only you, Dawn, only you would think of that. That wasn't true, of course. Lots of people thought of that. Lots of people thought of other things, too. But while I was there, I noticed that there were families with small children. And so I went home, and my daughter, who was 9, I sat her down, and I said, Samantha, there's some little kids there, and they could use some things. What would you be willing to let me have? And so she went through her toys, and she went through her books. And most importantly, this was the sleepover days, and Samantha had 3 sets of comforters that you could zip up into a sleeping bag. I don't know if any of you remember those. She had a Barney, she had a Beauty and the Beast, and she had a Snow White. And they came with pillows and pillowcases, and you could have them open or you could zip them up, and I had already washed them because the laundry had, this is how I was coping, was doing laundry mostly. So she said, okay, Mom, but she wasn't really convinced. She was only 9. So I thought, this time when I go back to the school, I'm going to take Samantha with me. So Samantha and we went back to Gander Academy, and when we walked in, I had a couple of very large bags. Samantha had bags with some of her toys and her books, and we saw this mom coming out. And she had one small child in her arms, and she had one attached to her leg. And those of us here know how children, when they're very afraid and they're nervous, they grab your leg and they just won't let go. So the mom was walking with one child attached and the other one in her arms, and she said, who is that for? And I said, this is for whoever needs it. And she said, may I have it? And I just went like that. The look on her face, I will never forget. And I am so incredibly grateful that I took Samantha with me that day so she could experience that, have that memory, and let that inform who she becomes as a person. It was very important. When I got back home, my mom called. My mom, Bretta Brown, was working at Gander Collegiate at the time, and her and my brother Keith, who's much younger than I am, were both volunteering. They were either asleep or they were volunteering at Gander Collegiate. And if you watch the You Are Here documentary, you'll see my mom briefly. She steps into the camera, realizes she's on camera, and steps back out. That's my mom. Anyway, my mom was there, and she spotted a young lady. She was crying, she was all alone, and my mom, being who she is, she approached this young lady. By this time, it was one night on the plane and at least one night in the shelter. As I think back, I'm not exactly sure if it was the second or third day, but my mom approached this young lady. She found out her name was Libby. Libby was from Israel. She was 17, and she was all alone. Her family had traveled from Israel to New York the previous day to attend a family celebration in New York. But Libby had to stay one extra day because she was writing an exam for her last day in school, or for her last year rather, in school. So because of that, Libby found herself in Gander and all alone. She was very upset. My mom approached her and she said, I have a daughter and she's married and they only have one daughter. She's a little girl. Would you like to go there? And Libby said, I think so, but I'll have to call my mom and dad. So Mom called me, told me about this. I went to Gander Collegiate. I got Libby. And I said, you come home, phone your dad, phone your mom. They're in New York, of course. They're at the epicenter where all of this horror was happening. So you call your mom and dad, you talk to them, and if they are okay, we'd love to have you stay. But I said, before we do that, do you like fried chicken? And she said yes, and because I knew she must be, and she was 17. So we went and got Mary Brown's, and then I brought her home. Libby called her dad, and her mom, but her dad I remember quite well because he needed to speak with me, and he needed to speak with my husband, Dean, and he had a very long conversation with us, and then finally he said, yeah, I think I'm okay. Libby can stay with you. So Libby stayed with us. She ate her fried chicken. She had a really long shower. She was 17, of course. And then she went to bed. And Libby stayed in bed because, believe me, I wasn't sleeping. She did not come out of that room. She did not wake up that first night for 12 hours. And I have to say that probably the biggest compliment that I've ever received in my life is that Libby felt safe enough to come to our home and to get in the spare bed that was in our home, close the door, and go to sleep. God bless Libby. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don, very much. That reflects, I mean, the vagaries, I guess, of when you're flying. Sometimes families fly together, sometimes it's just a person by themselves, and you don't know that if you need help or assistance, somebody is going to come. That's what we all hope for, isn't it? I know if my daughter was traveling alone, wouldn't mind having Don helping her out. Betty Clark, Mayor of Lewisport.
Good evening, everyone. The town of Lewisport played a very important role when dozens of aircraft carrying mostly 7,000 travelers landed in Gander. Once they were permitted to disembark and went through security, Jay Snyder of Lewisport became part of the emergency response team. And he was assigned to organize Lewisport by finding enough venues and accommodations for those people that were coming out to Lewisport. Anyhow, and once he did that, all the details were left to Captain George and Mayor Hooper of Lewisport. And anyhow, the venues that they had were with the Salvation Army, the Anglican Church, the Kinsman Club, the Lions Club, the Pentecostal Church, the Calypso Foundation, and the United Church. So right now I would like to relate a few stories that happened in Lewisport during 9/11, and some of them were compiled by volunteers. Captain George and Marlene of the Salvation Army, they were summoned to Gander along with other officers in Central, and they registered almost 7,000 people who were then bused to their temporary lodgings. Captain Marlene remembers one man yelling, "Where are we? Where are we?" And she replied in a quiet voice, "You are in the best and the safest place in the world." Truer words were never said. The plain people, as they were called, arrived at their designated lodgings in our town, bewildered and anxious to know where they were and why. We demonstrated to them how pulling together when your fellow man is in need can bring gifts of kindness, compassion, hospitality, and lifelong friends. I'll fast forward now because there's too much in between for me. I'll be here all night. To the day after 780 passengers arrived to the different venues. A friend of mine, who was Lynn Potter, arrived home from doing her errands, and she noticed a man and a woman walking down her driveway. So she said, "Hello, how can I help you?" And they told her they were from the plane that was diverted to Gander, and they spent the night sleeping on pews in the Salvation Army Church. And they were taking a walk and getting a breath of our good salt air. That's what they said. They were Dr. Jack and Mary Ellen McConnell on their way home to South Carolina from Italy. So Lynn and Calvin invited them into their home, but before they accepted, and during the conversation, they mentioned that they befriended a newlywed couple who were on their honeymoon in Europe, and would the Potters take them in? Certainly Cal and Lynn said, "Yes, come on." Anyhow, all four stayed with Lynn and Cal and became lifelong friends. But they discovered that Dr. McConnell was an acclaimed and highly respected innovator and humanitarian. He was instrumental partner in the teams that developed Tylenol and other well-known medical discoveries. Now, the Pentecost Church was another venue that took care of passengers. So Principal Kosh and the vice principal of the middle school used to take the passengers across the street and let them use the gym, the lounge, the TV, the phones, and the computers. And when the time came to leave, there was a lady there that worked with the Rockefeller Foundation. So she wanted to do something as a gesture of their gratitude, and expressed the interest in doing that. Anyhow, she figured she probably would do a computer lab for the students. So 6 weeks later, an email arrived, and her name was Denise, that a one-time donation to the school was received, and it was a check for $78,000 to buy a computer room for the school. So as J.D. Rockefeller once said, "I always tried to turn every disaster into an opportunity." Now we have Reverend Art Elliott, the retired United Church minister. So him and his wife, with the help of volunteers, prepared the church as another venue to house the people. They invited the couple, Barbara and Robert, to their home to use the phone. Now, Barbara really wanted to call her daughter. So anyhow, she called her daughter, and from the conversation, she learned that her daughter's husband, Bill Braggett, a photojournalist for Newsweek magazine, was killed while trying to capture photographs when the World Trade Center's Twin Towers collapsed. His wife told her mom she had urged him not to go because it was extremely dangerous. But Braggett replied that he was following the fireman, and he reassured her that he would be safe and he would meet her in 20 minutes. His 3 cameras were retrieved from the rubble, and the film was intact, capturing 300 riveting images. The Lions Club was being set up also, and the Mayor Bill Hooper was mayor then, and his wife Thelma noticed 3 women attempting to put 2 chairs together because all the beds there's no more beds available. So Thelma took them home, gave them clean clothes, fed them, laundered their clothes, and told them to call their families. But when Mayor Hooper arrived, he decided to have a conversation with them, but he wanted to get away from the tragedy. So he thought a good topic would be to speak about John F. Kennedy. However, one of the ladies said, "Oh dear, let's not talk about John Kennedy." She then said she once dated him, and in fact, while on a trip with the Kennedys, John's father, Joseph, gave her $20 to play at the casino, and she won. But guess what? He wanted his $20 back. Shirley Brooks Jones was another guest at the Hoopers' home, and on her return flight to Columbus, Ohio, a Canadian doctor decided that they should take up a collection from all the passengers to start a fund for Lewisport. $15,000 was collected, but Shirley said it could be placed in an endowment fund for future scholarships. That fund has grown to over $2 million today, and every year Shirley came to disperse the scholarships to high school students who had averages over 80%. Now, at the Pentecost Church, Trevor and Susan Tedford volunteered there and invited Isaac Grasso and his family to their home. So every day the Tedfords would go back to the church to volunteer, and they would leave the Rassos there. And they couldn't believe that families would leave strangers in their home while they went away. Anyhow, Isaac Grasso owned a successful restaurant in Little Italy in Manhattan. So he decided this night he would make his favorite dinner. So he made a favorite pasta dish for dinner, along with a special bottle of wine that he brought from Italy. After dinner, Isaac pushed the wine cork back in the bottle, and he challenged those around him to get the cork out of the bottle by using something that was on the table. He couldn't go in the kitchen or anywhere, it's got to be on the table. So anyhow, nobody could do it, and they conceded this to Isaac. So Isaac folded his napkin in such a way that when he inserted it into the bottle, it became an envelope and picked up the cork. And he successfully pulled the cork out of the bottle with that envelope. Others tried to do it, but then the Newfoundlanders couldn't do it, so but everybody enjoyed a good laugh. Anyhow, I was volunteering at the Kinsman Center. So my husband and myself were volunteers at the Kinsman Club. He was washed all the pots and pans. He never got to cook or do anything. He was in the back doing all the pots and pans. I was a waitress, a chambermaid, a taxi driver, whatever I could be, we could be. Anyhow, there was a lady there and her daughter from Limerick in Ireland. She was about 80 years old, and she had a very, very bad back, and she was unable to sleep on the cots. So Ross went to the seniors' home down the road. So he got a bed, and then he tried to wheel the bed uphill. Whoever thought of wheeling a bed uphill? But he tried. Anyhow, he needed help, so he got another volunteer to help him. What a sight, seeing 2 grown men pushing the bed up over a hill. The lady's name was Catherine. It was her first time on a plane, and she was going to visit her brother, a retired parish priest in California. We wanted her to stay at the house for the duration, and we reassured her that her flight would not leave without her. But we knew that she was very distressed about missing her flight. So sometime later, we brought her back to the center. But before she left, we suggested that she call her brother because he really didn't know if she was dead or alive. When she started to speak to him, there were a lot of tears before she could resume her conversation. The old saying goes, there was not a dry eye in the house, applied to all of us. She was a sweet and gentle soul, and we kept in contact with her until she passed away some years later. I could go on. In 2017, I had the honor of accepting the Duke of Edinburgh's Award for volunteers, recognizing all volunteers in Lewisport for helping stranded passengers during 9/11. Kindness and sharing have no language or borders, are universal, and cost nothing. Thank you very much. I could have gone on.
We'll pause just for a second. Our American special guests have arrived. And ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to take your seats, by all means. Mayor Farwell will escort them. Lovely story, Betty. Thank you very much. Don has my phone. I wondered where my timer was. Now, Des and Jean Dillon, I've known Des and Jean Dillon for a long time, and they're maybe the best well-known couple in Gander, perhaps? Longtime volunteers with the Red Cross. So, Des and Jean, would you please step forward and tell us about your story?
He's going to let females first. Okay, basically I stayed at home to take phone calls. A lot of people in Gander knew that we were associated with Canadian Red Cross, and of course a lot of people wanted to volunteer. So I stayed at home taking phone calls and messages, people's names and phone numbers, or different things that they wanted. And when Des called, I would give him the messages if it was something that I couldn't answer. So basically that's a lot of it. As you know, he had a cell phone, but in those days you couldn't call on the cell phones to places where there was equipment like hospitals or airports or whatever. So I had to wait till he called me from a land phone so that I could get it. As well as doing that, I came up a couple of days when there were short volunteers to just to answer phones, especially families wanting to reunite with their loved ones who wanted to know where they were. As well as that, I also did the wifely duties, of course. Being at a number of disasters, the one thing that you really appreciate is a good sleep. You do anywhere from 12 to 14-hour days. And of course, he was up from 4 o'clock in the afternoon till I think he got home about noon, so I made sure everything was quiet, that he was getting a good night's sleep in the day. Okay, so basically that's it. Everything else is all his.
We only got 10 minutes. Not very often I get to 7 minutes. Anyway, my role here tonight is on behalf of the Red Cross. But there's a lot of individual stories that I'd like to tell. But my story here tonight is I want to recognize what this airport did here on 9/11. And as you know, we had very short notice for the registration of the passengers here. The registration began about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and 11 o'clock the next day that we had all the passengers registered, and they were all sent to where they were going to for accommodations. And everybody that left here had food here at the time. So to make this happen, you need a lot of people. And the initial stages here, we had very short volunteers, so we had to do some quick training of volunteers here. We did call in Salvation Army, it was great. They were sending in a lot of their people to us. But at this airport here, we had all the staff here, the airlines, the Allied Aviation and Canadian Air Forces. They all volunteered staff to come over here, and we were able to give them a quick training on how to fill out this standard form for registration. And my son Dave, my other son Doug was one of a couple of the ones here. And we had a number of people do it that came over from the air traffic controllers. When they got off the boards, they call it, they come over here to assist in all they could do here. So going through that 13, 18 hours here, the services that were here, we had, it's almost like a mass headquarters. We had the hospital people, the psychologists here. We had the first aid and all that. So all those people came, a lot of people came off the aircraft were ill. Some had medications that were on the way home that they only had a couple of days left. So they were concerned about that because some were diabetics and you know what the medications were needed. So we were able to get the pharmacies downtown to come and take all their prescriptions and were able to provide the medical needs that they had right there. So all during that week, Gander Airport here was the center because from Tuesday until Sunday, we had set up here at the airport, the Red Cross, we had the telephone lines where people could call in to inquire about their families, where they were to. During the registration process, when we had it all finished, we were able to identify where every passenger was in Gander, all communities. So we would get calls from all over the states and families all over the world, really, and they were inquiring about their families. So we were able to take the information, contact wherever to Gambo, Lewisport, Northern Arm, and we will put all those people in contact with their families. So that was an ongoing all week long. So we had operation here for 24 hours. We had all kinds of volunteers that were here doing that. And those people were trained, and the staff at this airport and all the airlines, they did a fantastic job. But I think what happened here at this airport, the passengers came through here, and they all left through here. Now, in the meantime, some of the passengers had already gone back to Port-au-Basque by renting cars and so forth. But we had to know, we knew where all those people were gone because the airlines, the captains were not allowed to take off unless they knew where every passenger was. So we were able to do that, which is a good service because we the cooperation of all the schools and the places where all the passengers were did a great job there because if they had people leave their accommodations there, we were told that they phoned in here. So we were able to verify where they're to. So when the passengers start to departure here, the planes, the captains would come and we were able to check this inventory, just list the passengers. And every passenger was identified. Anybody that was missing, we knew where we were gone. They were identified. And this made it a lot easier for the planes to depart. So that was a major operation. But all during that week here, the staff at the airport, all the people that were here, and one of the biggest people here, that was the Allied aviation workers. They were going around to the planes, all the planes during the summer on, the planes were here for 30 hours. So they were bringing around with water and all kinds of supplies too. And we had a lot of people who were good heavy smokers, so we were able to get nicotine. They were brought around to the planes too. So the service that were provided here at this airport was fantastic. And the whole week, people were calling back in, checking on the aircraft. So communication between here and the town of Gander and the Emergency Center was great. But the coordination of all the agencies like the Salvation Army, the Red Cross, all the clubs, service clubs and schools, but everybody worked together, which showed great teamwork. And this is what made this possible here, that there was no frustrations. Passengers came here, there was almost 68 people. They're all processed here, they were gone through. They come here as soon as the plane, we did one plane at a time, and we're getting kind of short. So we opened up the domestic lounge. So we had 40, 50 volunteers registering right there. So 2 plane loads are done as soon as they got through security. And what amazed me first, because I was here for all the time, I see some of the first passengers that came here. But when the passengers came through security here, because pretty well everybody was a suspect, and everybody coming through, you couldn't take no luggage, saying what their personal items was, and that was well screened out there. So when passengers came through that door right here, they see friendly faces here, the Red Cross, Salvation Army, volunteers, but looking at that, and the person they came in, you could see the sense of relief on their faces. A lot of questions were, where are we, and where are we going? And for the whole week, that was a lot of the questions that we had to answer here. But in preparation then, when the skies were open again, the airspace, the planes started to go back again. So all the passengers had to come right back through here to be processed to go on the airline. So there was a lot of the people were pretty thankful and and looking forward to going, but some are pretty sad from where they left, the places that they were, how they were treated. So the people here really treated them really good. So I'd like to thank the airport people here and all the staff and the management. I think some of the people here tonight that were here at the time did a great job. Thank you very much.
Des and Jean, thank you very much, or Jean and Des, as it may be. Now, Betty Moulton, I'm sorry, Betty, I know the difference of that. Betty is a long-term volunteer, of course, with the Red Cross, and she has an interesting perspective on something else that the Red Cross was able to do. Betty?
Hello. Thank you so much for the opportunity to tell some more information about the Canadian Red Cross's response during 9/11. I'm so appreciative of the stories that have been told already and the heartwarm response that have been provided, whether it be through loving, kind gestures or through processes that the Red Cross had implemented to ensure the safety, security of people, and the timely response of registering people through the 9/11 process, and of course the safe return of passengers back to their home. So basically, I just want to speak to you tonight about the psychosocial response and the supports that were provided to the unaccompanied minors. These are children who are under the age of 12 who deplaned in Gander in 9/11. Many people were not aware of these events or these particular children, but if you think yourself, as I'm telling the story, I would like for you to think many of you are parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles, and just imagine putting a child on a flight with their name tag in the care of a very capable flight crew, but going from point A to point B. So point A being probably London, Great Britain, and then to arrive sometime later in New York. But of course, you bypass all that and you're now diverted to Gander, Newfoundland. Just imagine you as a parent and a caregiver or a guardian in that event. So I just wanted to speak to you about the morning of September the 11th, and I wrote notes because I want to stay on track, because I'm from the Bay in Newfoundland and I tend to tell stories, so I'll keep my story at the end and it'll be very brief. So anyway, during the morning of September the 11th, 2001, I was working as a social worker at the Canadian Forces Base 9 Wing Gander. Before that, of course, I had worked as a social worker for almost 20 years in community, and Des Dillon happened to be my director. So I've known Des for most of my adult life, which is retired now, so a long time. So during that day, early in the morning, I received a call from Des, who was also now retired, and he was with the Canadian Red Cross, who was at the time the team manager, who was assigned the responsibility to coordinate the Red Cross processes at 9/11 at the airport in Gander. So Des had called me because of my background in social work, as well as the training I had received with the Canadian Emergency Management College in Arnprior, Ontario, as well as training that I had received with the Canadian Red Cross over the years. So, of course, when I got the call from Des, I felt comfortable in responding. And so when I arrived at the airport within the hour, because my office was just across the way at the base, so within 20 minutes I could be here. And then I met up with Heather Paul, who was a psychologist, who also accompanied me to provide the support, the psychosocial support. And I'll explain a little bit in a minute what that actually means. It seems more complicated than what it really is. So we arrived at the airport, of course, we donned on our beautiful Red Cross vests and wore them very proudly. So the team that we compiled at the airport to deliver those psychosocial supports was largely comprised of social workers and human service workers in this Gander and the Grand Falls area. Gambo as well, because people tend to come into Gander to work, but we branched out and there was a response team as well from Grand Falls, Windsor. These individuals, along with myself and Heather, were available to offer support and assistance to individuals who got off the plane, who some were visibly upset, some were physically exhausted, and therefore, were probably needing some level of support. The support we offered was basically, just, a warm conversation. We offered them, assistance in getting a snack. We also offered them some support if they had small children. Some of the women were unaccompanied with very small children, and so for them to get a little snack even was difficult. So we would look after the children while they got a snack, or whether they went to change one youngster, and then we had to support the other child and care for the child. So basically, basically, that's the type of psychosocial support we had provided, and it was very insightful for Des to recognise earlier on that this level of support would be needed, because we knew people would be on the ground in the aircraft for periods of time until they were given clearance by, at that time, Transport Canada, and so we were wise in putting those services in place. All was going very well that day with our psychosocial response, and then the most extraordinary requests came forward. And I understand we have some flight crew here this evening in the audience, so they can respond to this after. But as I said, everything was going marvelously. We were putting out a psychosocial support team, and everything was as scheduled and as planned, But a flight attendant from an international flight approached myself and Heather, who were wearing our Red Cross vests, and approached us with two small children and said, approached us and said, well, what do we do with these unaccompanied minors? What do we do with the UMs? And so we just looked at each other and looked at this lady, right, with this beautiful Irish brogue, and said, well, what's a UM to start with? We didn't have a clue what a UM was. It could have been a Martian for all we knew. So anyway, she explained to us what an unaccompanied minor was. So at that point then, Heather and I both realised that a psychosocial, as we were the coordinators of the team, so at that point we realised that we needed to find placements for those children, as well as potentially other children, because this was very early on in the process of deplaning. So, so what we did was that, of course, I just want to explain to you just a little bit about the process. So the Department of Human Resources and Employment was, they had a government mandate for providing emergency social services to the province. And so they were here at the airport, strategically positioned with the rest of us, which was very well thought out. And they were the ones who were responsible for providing accommodations. So we could not place children in public accommodations. Don very adequately, I can't say the word, but anyway, very well explained the 17-year-old who was distressed. And, and she was 17. But you can imagine these little children under the age of 12 with their name tag on them, saying who they are, where they're from, and being, passed now over to somebody in a Red Cross vest in a foreign country. Some of the children were from the Ivory Coast in Africa who spoke only French. Some were from Venezuela who spoke only Spanish. Some, of course, were English speaking, and we could accommodate that. So anyway, once we realised that these accommodations in the general community, similar to what Betty was describing, the Legion and the Knights Columbus and different other sectors, we realised very early on that this wasn't a suitable placement for these children, and we really did have an emergency situation on our hands. So the flight attendant provided us with all the information about the children, and then, of course, what did we do? But we went over to our manager with the Red Cross and said, Des, how are we going to manage this? Because it's very interesting that, we couldn't put them into shelter accommodations. So we had a major problem to resolve, and it had to be done in a very timely manner, and had to be done in the best interest and security for those children. And there were a number of them. So as parents of young children, again, put yourself in that situation. You're wondering where these children, your child is. So not only did we have to ensure the security of the children, but we needed those children off the flights, arranged in a home, and then we wanted to be able to contact the family to give them reassurance that, the Red Cross now has custody really of your child, and we need and we have secured accommodations for them. So and it's important to understand that this was the only aspect of the response at the airport that took us off guard a bit. It was something that we really did not expect or anticipate. So therefore, we were surprised when the flight attendant approached us, because we had been involved with disaster emergency management now for years, and we had done wonderful exercises. We had a wonderful team on the ground where had all this capacity built in Gander. And so we were able to, work within our plans and bring our resources together. But we did not have this plan for these children. So again, what we what we did was that we drew upon our experience. We drew upon our professional networking and our collaborative skills, and we came together and we worked then with the social workers with the Department of Child, Youth, Family Services. So essentially what we did was that we worked with them. At the time, there was no foster care, no foster homes available, so there was no availability to place them in care, even on a short-term basis. So what we did was we developed what was called a child care plan. So there were certain requirements for this plan, and so we had to do this as an emergency response. This is not something that we promote, you know, if a child is in care for any reason, it goes through a long process of approving a home. This was an emergency situation that we had to minimize and mitigate our risk and work within the parameters of a scope. So basically what we did was that we worked with the department, and in doing so, we put measures in place. So we understood that, you know, the child welfare workers would go into a home, they would follow up with families, they would also, the best interests of the children would be taken into account. There would also be the parents or the families, the host families we call them, had to have a security check. So oftentimes there was a pastor or there was a school teacher or people or RCMP officer, we knew of people who had come forward and offered support. So once they were in the home, it's very important to understand again that the process we followed then was that we had to notify the parents. So once we identified the child, the home, we phoned the parents. So myself and Heather went to with the child or children, because there were several sibling groups. We brought them into an area of the airport where there was some privacy. We contacted the family or the parent or the guardian. And we basically very deliberately had very structured sentences because we wanted just to say, hello, my name is Betty, I'm with the Canadian Red Cross, we have your son, Joshua. That your son is now safe and that you can speak to him in a minute, but that when you're finished speaking to him, we'd like to talk to you again. So basically we went through that process. We gave, and then when the child and the parents spoke, we then had the opportunity then, of course, to follow up with the parent again and just reassure them that, you know, this family has been selected, that at any time that you can contact the child at this home and the child can call you at any time as well, that there will not be any TVs on in the home because we did not want them to know and be able to try and understand what was going on. And we also said that, you know, that if there was any incidents where the children required psychosocial support or if they wanted help or counselling, that was available through the Child Youth Family Services program. So before I conclude, I just wanted to tell you a little story, and this will be a quick story. It's a very memorable story because it's regarding a phone call we had with one of the parents. So the phone call that resonates with myself and Heather most is that there were two sisters, and they were very young, they were under the age of 12, and they were traveling to New York, but coming from London, the UK. So their father worked at the World Trade Center towers. So by the time the girls had arrived in Gander, the Twin Towers had already fallen. When we contacted him, he told us that he had spoken to his daughters prior to them getting on the flight in London. He also told them that he would be dropping into the office before he was able to pick them up at the airport in New York City. So his office was at the Twin Towers in New York City. So as it happened that day, traffic was very busy in New York City that morning. And so he decided to forego stopping in his office at the World Trade Center, and instead he went straight to the airport to pick up his daughters. So as he wanted to know if the girls had known any information now about the fall of the towers, and we said they do not know this, that was not announced by the pilot, and he said that he did not want us to inform them of that. Even though he was safe, they knew a lot of the men and the families that would have been affected by the Twin Towers falling, and he did not want to upset them. So we had told that then to the host family, who actually was a Pentecostal pastor here in town. And so I'd just like to conclude and just say that, you know, this story in itself, the story around, you know, the father in New York City and the connection that we have with Gander and of the how we were able to alleviate a lot of his stress and fears at that time. In a disaster situation, we find that people always step up and provide support, and we see the best in human, and we've demonstrated that here tonight. So again, it's very important that we understand that that Gander has many connections to New York and to the other sites that were unfortunately impacted by the terrorist attacks. Before I finish, I just would like to say that in addition to what Des had mentioned, working at the airport for these extended hours, through for long periods of time, we were very well fed, and we were, you know, despite some tired, we worked very well together and worked with our community partners. But you have to understand as well, is that we worked in a situation where we knew that Transport Canada had, under the Yellow Ribbon operation, had told air traffic controllers to divert any planes from Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver to smaller airports, right? Because there was a fear that there could be terrorists coming on some of these flights. And so they had to minimize their risk. So in knowing that we did not know which flights were coming into this airport, imagine working under that stress and working day and working under, you know, for extended periods of time, knowing that you don't know who's coming off the planes, you don't know if one of these planes, you know, has a bomb or a terrorist on it, and so that in itself is an interesting story. But again, everything worked out very well, and it speaks to the level of preparedness that we had, the collaborative partners that we had, and the capacity to respond to a disaster response. Thank you very much.
Well, very much. Thank you, Betty Moulton. Now, that's interesting. I've been a Gander for a long time myself, and I was here during 9/11. But you touched on a few points that I would not have thought of. For example, not having the TV on when the kids were there. That would not have occurred to me. Something so simple, don't turn on the TV. Because why do the kids need to know? They're way late enough. Isn't that enough stress? Some really interesting points that I didn't know. Thank you very much. Sheldon Kirby. Sheldon is a former teacher in a community called Norris Arm. And Norris Arm is, I think it's about 45 minutes west of Gander. Little place I've been to many times. And I think he's got some very interesting observations about what it was like to be a school teacher during 9/11. Sheldon?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests. Thanks for the invite. Now I'm just, I used to be Mr. K at the school, and for a few days I ran the Hillview Academy Hotel for a group of passengers from Delta DL49. Currently I'm with the Board of Directors of the Norris Arm Heritage Society, and I'm the curator for the living history of 9/11. We've a room devoted to our community and what they've done, and the passengers, their responses, and we have video slideshows and storyboards. So I never brought any photos with me because I'm trying to get you to come and see it. Right? And you can see that for free because it's such a wonderful exhibit. Every time I think about 9/11 event, I think of the REM song, "It's the End of the World as We Know It," because it was. The world changed. In North America, we didn't have the same security that they did in Europe. We were not used to seeing police with military-style rifles in airports or at train stations. And after the 9/11 event, it became commonplace. Every large building you went into, you had to go through a magnetic scanner and so on. So when Brian told me to tell my story about 9/11, there's no possible way that I could do so without talking about the people of Norris Arm and who put their lives on hold for a group of 150 to 200 stranded individuals from all over the world. Now, Brian, I rewrote this bloody story about a half dozen times. I probably wore out 3 crayons doing it, so what do you use to write a story? Okay, so at the time of 9/11, Norris Arm had a population of 911 people. True. Statistically speaking, some would claim that it was an economically depressed region. We've got no hotels or restaurants, malls, chicken or burger joints. We had a gas bar, a grocery store, a liquor outlet that was used quite frequently, and a bunch of service groups. What the town lacked in amenities, it made up for with big hearts, a strong will, and a Christian belief system that's just unreal. When asked to care for the needs of a large group of strangers, the answer was bring it on. So we had one. I got back to the school. I do have a couple of stories. That's not my pen. Okay, I do have a couple of stories. One about myself is when I came back to the school from lunch. We were allowed to eat lunch at that time. Teachers don't usually get lunch these days, but I went to the library and I was talking with a staff member and a few students that were in my junior high class, and I was looking and the television was playing, and I saw, geez, I saw this plane flying into a building, and I said, boy, that's a really high-def video game. And the teacher looked at me, he says, Shell, that's real time, that's happening in New York now. Well, you know, it's just like you got a kick in the pants. And so what would you do as a history teacher? You go and you grab all your students, you bring them in the library and say you're watching history as it's happened, take notes. They didn't take any notes, but they sure knew what happened. So, like everybody else, I watched that over and over and over again until I was almost desensitized to the video. And that's important to another part of the story. Then I get a call later in the afternoon from the town clerk, and she says, well, we got a plane load of passengers going to come in. Can you look after them at the school? We want to bed them down. No problem. The principal calls, close the school, we're going to do all fine. So my wife gets on the phone, calls a few parents, more than a few, most of them, to get air mattresses, blankets, pillows, the whole deal, because we didn't know what was going to happen. It wasn't until later the next day that the Salvation Army showed up with army cots, which was good. The service groups and churches were all alerted. They were going to make food, prepare food, and the whole deal. The school was going to be used for sleeping quarters and showering and washroom facilities. The Lions Center was going to be used to feed them all. For how long? Who knows? The answer to that was, okay, what else? Come on, bring it on. So that evening, my wife, she went to the school. She changed her kindergarten classroom into a daycare and a nursery. She knew that was going to happen. I went down, I grabbed a bunch of students, went down to the gym and put out all the old gym mats and all of the sleeping stuff that we collected from town and hoped for the best, and nobody came. They were still on the plane. They were on the tarmac waiting to be processed. We didn't know. This was the failure in logistics for us, so we stayed up all night waiting for visitors. First night of no sleep. There were 3 more. So we were informed the next morning we were going to get one plane load of passengers, Delta 49 from Frankfurt, Germany, en route to Cincinnati, and we had thought we were prepared to meet them. We had food, we had supplies. Walmart came, filled the place with toilet tissue, paper towels, face cloths, towels, baby wipes, baby diapers, body wash, deodorant, toothpaste, toothbrushes, whatever we needed. Walmart came in, Salvation Army came in, we were stocked. We fooled ourselves. We weren't ready for what happened. So I didn't know that the passengers hadn't been informed of everything that was going on. They had been given some information that there was an incident in New York. And as a result of the incident, the planes were diverted to Gander. So, stupid me, I had the television, the big screen television going in the library, and when the American group of passengers came in, they hit a beeline for the library, and when they saw the news cycle, it was like somebody sucked all the energy and oxygen out of the room. It was gone. And then, next thing you know, there's sobs, a few screams, and then where are the telephones? Telephones weren't working. All the telephone lines were blocked. Cell service at that time in Norris Arm was archaic. Cell service today in Norris Arm still sucks. Sorry, but it's true. I was affectionately known as the administrator of the computer lab. The kids called me the computer room janitor. And so everybody wanted to get in contact with their folks. The easiest way was by email. I gave them all passwords to enter onto my network. We had a little satellite dish on top. We put 2 students on the roof with tinfoil hats, and away we went. And they were all able to get a hold of their families, their companies. We had people from, let's see, where do we have people? We had people from Africa, African nations, India, Israel, the Arab nations, England, Germany, and the USA as well. There was no language barrier, of course. There was a lot of this, a lot of that, a lot of drawing of pictures, and when all else failed, as in rural Newfoundland, we served them food. Food, that was the main thing. That fixed everything. One of the passengers was walking down the hall and she cried, oh gee, she cried for 3.5 days. Oh, back and forth, back and forth. She was a young woman just married and she just cried and cried and cried. And every time she cried, somebody says, come here, my ducky, come on, we have a cup of tea and a bun, right? She gained about 4 pounds. It was a riot in that. I think the story of the loaves and fishes originated in Norris Arm. Because in times of crisis, of course, rural Newfoundland has one solution. We feed everybody. And that's true. I mean, when boats would go down, they would drag everybody, off the ice or off the shore or whatever, to bring them in to give them a cup of tea and food. That made them feel better. And it's still the same today. That's the way it goes. One of the passengers said to me, he said, I've never seen so much food. And he said, it's all free. He said, tables full of food all the time, and no table ever emptied. For the 3.5 days they were there, not a table emptied. I'm not finished yet. I've been down this road before, okay. And it was berry season. So we had cakes, and we had muffins, and we had blueberry crumble coming out of the woodwork. And the passengers went home well fed and with recipes in their back pocket. All right, I got enough. Can I tell one more little one? Please, just a little one. Okay, so it has to do with the language and food, of course. My wife and this German passenger, they were sitting in the staff room because that was a place where they would go and they would talk quietly and they'd talk about their families and stuff like that. So this German passenger was teaching my wife some unsavory German language. She was failing miserable at it and she was making it worse than it really sounded. Anyway, 2 of the local women were in. They were sisters-in-laws, and they were used to, brattling back and forth all the time. And I was making coffee, probably the 50th or 100th pot of coffee I'd made in those days, and I was just wiped because I hadn't slept. God is my judge. I had 2.5 hours sleep in 4.5 days, full days, and I was numb. And these two women were there, and I was making coffee, and I wasn't thinking. I could hear the German and the other language my wife was trying to speak in the background. And the two women started, and they started to talk, of course, in the colloquial language of Outport, Newfoundland. Because before that, they were all watching, and they were trying to speak proper English so that the tourists would understand them. Anyway, they started, and they were doing tea and putting out more buns on the table and more cake and that. And I turned around, and the German passenger's eyes were like this. Yeah, what language are they speaking? And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
So I guess my question, Sheldon, do you know any German? Thank you very much, Sheldon. Bishop John Wadden, of course, as I mentioned earlier, Bishop of the Anglican Church here in Newfoundland, and would like to welcome Bishop John, a man I've known for quite some time, and I think you have some wonderful things to say, sir. Thank you.
If I forget before I'm done, someone yell out and say, tell us about the bears and the stars, will you? Is that something I don't want to leave out? I'll leave these notes here for you, because I think you wanted some, right? I was in my office in Badger's Key putting up crown molding, and my wife said, John, come and see. And of course, we were watching the televisions for hours after that. And later that evening, I'm standing up looking out the window in my office, and it's getting dark. And the phone rang. And this was David Torval, who was the executive officer of our diocese at the time. And he said, John, you know what's going on. I said, of course, at least as much as I can know. And he said, well, everything is full, and we've been asked to help. So can you in your local area try to do something? And I have to say, that gave me focus. It helped, because now I had something tangible that I could start doing on my own. So I made a call, and another call. And in New West Valley, it took on a life of its own. It really, really did. Within 2 hours, we had a network set up, and we had a set time where there was going to be a motorcade in front of my house. And I wish I had a picture to show it to you. Getting dark, to me, that's very symbolic. So we had the community people with trailers and pickup trucks, and we had the fire truck cube van there, and Carter's agencies was there with their cube van. Everything was packed full. We were headed off to Mintbrook Camp. And so when we arrived there, the Synod office staff was there waiting for us, this huge entourage of people. And what happened as we were getting ready is every community between Badger's Key and Gambo on that stretch of highway heard about it, and they got involved too. So we arrived at the camp with lots of stuff, and we had to try to sort out where the stuff was going to go. At the time, we had ordered some new mattresses, and they were still in storage. So we started hauling them out, putting them in the auditorium, and unpacking the food, and doing all kinds of things to get ready for the flight that we soon came to know our flight. It was a U.S. Air flight, Flight 27 from Paris heading into Philadelphia. And I would like to describe these people, I guess sort of like Sheldon was saying, you know, we had people who were the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker, really did, you know. I'd say half of the people on the flight couldn't speak English. Anyway, we arrived at the camp, and these wonderful people arrived, And you've heard the dynamics. I can't add to that, but what happened at Minkbrook Camp, of course, is we had a group of people who'd been on an airplane for 20 hours. They kind of knew what was going on. Some of them had cell phones, one person had a radio, and they had some idea what was happening. And so anyway, they turned up at camp after being on a plane for 20 hours, put aboard school buses, taken over a dark highway. Now, if you're from Philadelphia or from Paris, you're driving on the highway, you can see everything. So they drive down the road to Minkbrook Camp, and lo and behold, and if you're familiar with the area at all, there's cabins in there, and the cabin owners have a garbage collection place there. So you know who's there? A whole bunch of black bears. So we have a bunch of people who are disoriented, really disoriented, going to this place in the wilderness, and they had no idea where they were going. And we were concerned about that because at Minkbrook Camp, it's a camp. You know, we had the auditorium, we had a great kitchen, and we had, a place for showers and all that. But I tell you, we were very aware of that disorientation. And so anyway, I have to say to you, they handled it well. At Minkbrook Camp, what began to happen was we saw the birth and the growth of a community. There were a group of young men there who were Islamic. They were terrified because they didn't know if they were going to be safe amongst us. They soon became part of our family. And remember that some of these people, as I think was mentioned here earlier, sitting in these planes who were trying to figure things out, a lot of these people thought perhaps Gander was going to be a target as well. They knew that in many ways they could become collateral damage. So these were the things that were part and parcel of the introduction that they had to Minkbrook Camp. But as I say, they did well. And we began to have conversations. We began to meet in the evenings and have impromptu concerts and with a little bit of food on the side. And people who had gifts and talents came forward to share it with the others. And we even had church services. We respected, of course, the wonderful diversity of approaches to faith and religion. And one evening we were walking up across the field after one of our services, and this guy puts his arm around me and says, "Ah, John boy, nice service." He said, "Thank God, I'm an atheist." I can handle that, you know. I'm trying to be brief, but I want to say to you that I produced a video that was uploaded today, actually, with the whole Minkbrook narrative, and you can find it on my Facebook page. And in the video, I've included a whole bunch of pictures from our experience there. So the campers really did take advantage of the camp setting. We had the canoes there that were available and the sports equipment, and our trails were all marked out for nature walks and that sort of thing. And we were there to help people if they wanted to do something and have a bit of sports or whatever. And so we took care of that. One of the things that I will always remember, there's a whole bunch of things that come to you as you talk about it and share with it. They would ask us, and a lot of them would, "Can you please turn off the lights at Minkbrook Camp?" And so we turned off our outdoor security lighting and all the lights in the cabins and all the lights in the auditorium, so that these people, most of them who lived in cities, could see the stars. And those times, you don't need words, do you? There were many, many times at the camp when the language of love just took over. We didn't need anything else. So I'm jumping around a bit because certain things are popping into my heart, and I'm going to spare you this. But at one point, the captain of the flight came to visit us. And that in itself reminded me of the power that airline employees have. I have the deepest respect for people who fly airplanes and for flight attendants. I've traveled a fair bit, and I'm always somewhat in awe. Now, in awe of the patience. Like, you guys are doing pretty good right now, because I know most of you gotta pee. But seriously. When the captain arrived on the campgrounds, people came running towards him. But their captain was there. And he did the best he could to help them reassure everybody that this is going to be okay. And so when he left, it was a whole different environment there. The captain had been there, and there was a sense that all would be well. So for those of us in any kind of leadership position in any way, we can do a lot of good. The big problem we have, I'm almost done here now, the big problem we had at Mint Brook, of course, is that obviously there was no cell coverage there, and our cell phones were terrible. Flip phones and all that. And we purchased a satellite system, and we all got gung-ho about getting this hooked up. And I was really happy, because now we're going to have a satellite system at Mint Brook Camp. And couldn't get it to work. The south side of Mint Brook, there's a big hill, and of course, I believe it was the annex satellite that we needed. We couldn't get it. We just could not. The satellite was down below that mountain, and that was it. And so what we ended up doing was recruiting a bunch of people all around central Newfoundland to, in their homes, use their VCRs and record news programs. And whatever newspapers you could get your hands on, buy them, bring them in Senate office, wherever, photocopy them. And so we were going back and forth to the camp with these videotapes, and we had TVs set up everywhere. And people were just waiting their turn to find the tape that was matching where they came from, so that they could watch the news. And it was just tear the heart out of it sometimes too, right? So one of the things that I did is set up a blog. Back in those days, I was a bit of a, I don't know what I was, but I was determined to make the best of the internet. Of course, it was all dial-up in those days, but I started a blog, and for those who were comfortable with it, I would take their messages to my house, and I would relay them to families. They would answer them, and I would print off the replies and take off back to the camp and share them with the people that were there. And it was about an hour's drive for me to go from there to my house. So we did everything that we could. And yeah, I can see the faces of some of the people that were there now. And when it came time to leave, we all had our goodbyes, and we were laughing and carrying on and crying. And one of the passengers took a picture of the auditorium where the chapel is at Mint Brook and sent it to me. There was a rainbow. Yeah. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Bishop John. Now, when I was a young boy, I went to Mint Brook Camp a number of times, and I can attest to the fact that if you're there for a week or so, as we were when we were kids, it does become a community. And yeah, I remember the lights going out. I remember seeing the stars. Now, I come from a small community, so I grew up with the stars. But yeah, that's something that you don't think about. The people from some other cultures, maybe even close to your own, have not experienced something that you take for granted. And what a simple setting Mint Brook Camp was that allowed them to do this. But I do have a question for you, though. Were all the bears accounted for when they left? Thank you, Bishop John. Karen Vescanyan has a story from, I guess, a very different point of view, that of flight crew. And Karen was here 20 years ago tomorrow. Karen?
Hi, good evening. I'm Karen Vescanyan. I was a working crew member on September 11, 2001. Today, I am reunited with two of my crew members, although one's missing, Pam and Aggie. It's our extreme pleasure to be here with you tonight. Just a little bit about me. I'm a proud flight attendant. I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I'm even a lady Shriner, but my favorite title of all is being a screeched-in newfie. September 11th for most of us started off as a normal day. We were working a flight from London to Houston, and we had a great crew and we had a light load, so today was going to be easy. Our flight had been airborne for approximately 2.5 hours when we were briefed about the World Trade Center attacks. Our captain informed us that U.S. airspace had been closed and that we were awaiting instructions on a place to land. He told us that when plans were in place, that he would inform the passengers. We were also instructed to inspect the cabin for suspicious activities. Our crew was so professional. All of our years of training took over, and we were all calm and collected. After what seemed to be an eternity, the captain did an all-crew call and told us we were cleared for landing here in Gander. As we strapped ourselves into our jump seats, our captain announced over the PA, "American airspace has been closed. We're landing in Canada. I will update you when we're on the ground." Understandably, the passengers were quite anxious. Upon landing, we looked out of the aircraft windows and we saw plane after plane parked on this tarmac. It was apparent that this was no longer an easy or a normal day. As promised, our captain informed the passengers of the terror attacks on American soil. He also stated, "As you can tell by the crowded runway here, we're probably going to be on board for a while." Headed to Houston that day, we had a large group of oil men on our flight, and one by one, someone would come to the back galley for a drink. Very, very innocently, one drink became two, two became three, and so on and so forth. People felt the need to bond. As people gathered in the back galley, if they weren't already friends, they soon were. In 2001, not many people owned cell phones, and if so, it wasn't possible to charge them on the aircraft. We had one passenger that had a full charge, and starting with the crew, he offered everyone on that plane to use his phone. We were very conservative with our time, knowing that the phone was going to eventually die, and we wanted as many people as possible to use it. In adversity, many people revert to their true selves. One of our passengers, who obviously wasn't using his phone connection or sharing, said, "My meeting in Houston has now been canceled, so I'd like to fly back to London immediately." And while we were passing out sandwiches from cardboard boxes, some of the sandwiches some of you folks here probably made, one of my passengers said, "I ordered the vegetarian meal." So, of course, being the trained professionals that we are, we somehow accommodated him. After about 10 hours on the runway, we were told that it would be at least 10 more because people were being shipped in to process us. It was then that we encouraged our party scene in the back galley to take a break and get some rest. Throughout the day, we would look out the windows and see the lines of cars parked along the road, and y'all were looking at us. I can only imagine what your view was like. 29 hours and 50 minutes into our duty day, we were told it was finally our turn to deplane. We had a group of passengers come to the back galley and say, "We don't want to get off. We know what it's like here. We don't know what it's like out there." Again, being trained professionals, we encouraged them that it would be okay. It was extremely surreal finally deplaning and being processed by the custom officials. The setup in this terminal was amazing, and the map on the wall, which I believe was here, that said "you are here" was extremely appreciated even by us seasoned travelers. It was late afternoon on the 12th of September when we arrived at the Hotel Gander. Because there was no television coverage or internet, this was the first time that we actually witnessed the horrific events that had taken place in New York. I know no one here will ever forget where they were that moment in time. During our stay, we coordinated with the Red Cross to visit our passengers. They had thought we had left them. Our passengers were accommodated at the fire hall in Gambo. When we walked in the fire hall, we saw cot after cot lined up. It was a very, very impressive. It was also spaghetti night. The gentleman that let us use his cell phone was just finishing his dinner and said, "If we stay here much longer, I'm not going to fit into the one outfit I have to fly home in." Quite a few of our passengers were not present at the fire hall. We were told that they were at a bar. When the Red Cross driver heard this, he immediately said, "Oh, I know where they're at. They're at the Trailways. I'll take you there." Never in my life did I think the Red Cross would take me to a bar. At the Trailways, we saw several of our passengers, and it was really special to reconnect with them off of the airplane. We also had a Beatles tribute band on board. It was told to us that they had performed at the Trailways the night before, and they sang Hard Day's Night and dedicated it to the crew. Every day we were well taken care of, and we had almost nightly visits at the bar from Mayor Claude Elliott. Where are you, Claude? He did his best to keep us all updated with the current situation. Like most other plane people, we walked to Walmart. We couldn't make it half a block before somebody was offering us a ride, a key to their car, or an invite to dinner. Apparently, adopting an airplane person was a popular thing that locals did to help out. One of our passengers shared a story about being adopted at the Trailways. He said instead of being driven back to the host home, he was canoed there. I don't know many places in the world that you can adopt a tall Englishman and canoe him home. What a terrific open-door policy. One night at Legends, we met an air traffic controller. He asked if we were plane people, and if so, which flight. When I told him Continental 5, he said with tears in his eyes, "I have spoken to Continental Flight 5 for 10 years, and I have never seen a face." He hugged me so hard, I thought I was going to break in two. It was September 15th before we were allowed to reboard our flight. We were sad to leave, yet we wanted to be home. I remember feeling guilt for having such a wonderful time here in Gander, especially while our country and so many people were hurt and suffering. And our world had certainly changed. As people settled back on the plane, Marion, one of our co-workers, noticed Nick and Diane. She said, Karen, I think some of our passengers hooked up. And as you know, hooked up they did. Marion and I reminisced over this in a recent phone conversation. We laughed about the hot towel, cold towel scene in Come From Away. We both claimed to be that girl. So once and for all, I will settle this. We both said it, but I said it first. Our passengers were happy to go home, but also had the same bittersweet thoughts of leaving all of you behind. They told us story after story of their wonderful experiences here and all their new friendships. As we touched down in Houston, Texas, cheers and tears of joy were expressed by all. A fitting end to our story are these beautiful words written by Kim Pham, one of our fellow crew members. Sorry. Gander, you nourished the hungry. You sheltered the displaced. You guided the lost. You warmed our souls. You stole our hearts. And we are forever grateful to you. Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
Well, thank you, Karen. Karen, if you may have noticed, is wearing her flight attendant uniform from all those years ago. I don't mean to brag, but I can still fit into the tie I wore in high school. That's about all. But everyone, thank you so much. I mean, all of your stories, you enjoyed them. And if any of you are unsatisfied, you can get your money at the door. Your stories, they make us proud, and they make us humble at the same time. Don't they? Yeah. Well, I have one surprise guest for you tonight to introduce, Robin Schmidt. Come up, please. Robin is a Delta flight attendant, a current flight attendant, who was driven here from Atlanta, Georgia. She left Atlanta on September 2nd, and she drove 2,500 miles. She traveled all this distance to meet us and to meet you and to meet you. And she would like to say a few words. Robin?
I'm just going to start out by saying I will not be able to do this without crying, so just bear with me. I have wanted to come to Gander for 20 years. Shortly after September 11th, I saw, I don't know if you call it a letter, because back then we didn't really have the technology that we do today, but I saw a post by a Delta flight attendant on Delta Flight 15 sharing about their story about Gander. And I am a humanitarian at heart. I knew at 5 years old that I was meant to be a flight attendant for Delta Airlines, and it took me 2 other careers to get the courage to apply, but I've now been doing it 23 years, and I've had 20 years to think about what I wanted to say when I got here. I know for 19 of those years, I said, there is no way I'm going to be there on the 20th anniversary. That is meant for the people that were there on that day. During that time, it was, in my mind, it was meant for those people to be reconnected with those of you that brought them into their homes. But I started praying at the beginning of this year about where God wanted me to be. And I don't know if any of y'all have ever had that very deep down feeling that you're supposed to do something, and if you don't, you're going to regret it the rest of your life. God said, go to Gander. And then he said, and I want you to drive. And my response to God was, you are an idiot. I'm a flight attendant. I can fly for free. But he had other plans, and My very first destination when I left Atlanta was a field in Pennsylvania to honor those that perished on United 93. I'm just going to be honest, there is nothing about September 11th that will never take away the fact that any of us that are flight attendants or pilots will ever think that could have been me. We always think it. So for me, going to United 93, although as sad as it was, and as much as I think that every person on that plane, aside from the terrorists, are absolute heroes, y'all are heroes in this room as well. And I want to thank you, which is what I've wanted to do for 20 years. Thank you. Not only for setting up the airport in such a quick amount of time, not only for bringing in the plane people, but since the day I got hired at Delta, I've always said, it doesn't matter what airline I work for. I'm not just a Delta family member, I'm an airline industry family member. Thank you for taking care of my Delta family and for every airline that landed here and every airplane. Thank you to Gander, thank you to every community around here. I wanted to say this for so long. Thank you so much for taking care of the people that we take care of every day. And thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for just being here and being amazing human beings.
Thank you, Robin. Very, very heartfelt. I first had contact with Robin just maybe 3 days ago. She was well on her way. She didn't know the reception that she was going to get. She didn't know if anybody was even interested. Well, I thought, have I got the venue for you? So now we're going to have a few minutes for a question and answer period. If any of you have questions, I will get you to put up your hand. We might not have time for a lot, but what I'll ask you to do is put up your hand if you have a question. Matt here will bring over the microphone. He'll hold the microphone, ask your question. You can stand if you want, but then sit down when you've asked. And you can point your question to any one of the people here, or you can point it to anyone generally if you wish. And gentleman right on the corner here. Matt, can you?
I have a question for Sheldon. It's a great story. I'd like to know, with so little sleep, when did your life get back to normal?
When I retired. I guess when I retired about 12 years after, as a teacher, and we had 5 kids at the time too, so there wasn't much sleep anyway, so I was pretty well used to being sleep deprived. But I don't, when I think of it, there was no sleep, but we ran on some kind of an energy because we were really proud of what we were doing. Now, I'm not from Newfoundland. I'm from another province in Canada, and I came here, and they adopted me, but they treated me exactly the same way as they treated the passengers from DL49. My first year I was teaching in Buckins, I never ate one meal at my own apartment. I'd be walking home from school, and they'd be like, yeah, so I had everything. I had tours with shotgun shots in it, and just the weirdest things. But anyway, so sleep, and I, it came. No matter, we had to do what we had to do, and that was it. And everybody in the community wore themselves out to do it, and they felt darn good for doing that. And that's just the basic. We were looking after humankind. A German passenger said to me, as a result of what he experienced there, he said, "There's hope for humanity."
Thank you, Sheldon. Thank you very much. Matt, there's a gentleman right up over here in the front. far right over there.
First of all, to the mayor of Lewisport, thank you for the fantastic story. Did you know that Shirley is here?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
I had dinner with her tonight. Shirley, where are you?
Shirley. Oh, yes, she was in Lewisport. I'm not sure if she's here or not.
Yeah. So we're referring to Shirley Brooks Jones, and Shirley is the lady on the flight who arranged for the scholarship for all those kids in Lewisport. She's standing up in the back. Well, I was going to say thank you, Shirley Brooks Jones, but I think the audience did that for me. All right, Matt, Jeff Tucker up in the front here has a question.
Thank you very much. I guess this is a question, but I got a couple of things. I'm not sure who comprises the audience, but first of all, before you leave, have a look at our mural. That was painted in 1956 by an artist named Ken Lougheed, and he did it kind of like the Sistine Chapel. It's done with egg whites, and that's been there now for, I guess, 60 years in pieces, and it's entitled The Evolution of Flight. And when you stand back and look at it, you'll see how different aviation. Sorry, but I wanted to point that out. And the guy there with the binoculars, wherever you go in this lounge, he's looking at you. Just have a look. And it was in this room which we referred to, I'm sorry, I worked at the airport, and for 35 years of my life, I guess, is devoted to this place. And I look around and I remember Des and his people coming through that door, and a Salvation Army officer standing and just with a smile and hello, just to start alleviating some of their anxiety and fear, I guess. We had to have it's gone. There's a payphone somewhere there, and we had to have it disconnected because, of course, people wanted to have access to telephones. This is a very historic room. At one era, we had 100 aircraft a week, and the passengers came in here for a can of Pepsi on their way from Moscow to Havana. They use Gander as a place to just refuel on the way, and we had to open the cans of Pepsi that they had and put a straw in it because they used to turn the cans upside down and all around, and they'd explode, of course, when they opened them. Anyway, I won't go on. I'm noted for being short-spoken, but I want just a couple little things I wanted to say, and I wrote them down so we can go on. But my wife, Geraldine, who's sitting next to me, worked at the school board office. She's an educator, and she volunteered at Gander Academy. And the school was able to acquire a lot of undergarments. And so she came up to the school and volunteered, and people were, like, they were on the aircraft for a certain length of time, and they didn't have their luggage. So as I heard this story, she, being kind of a grade 2 teacher in her heart, she took a piece of Bristol board and drew bloomers on the Bristol board and a pair of jockey shorts. Because of all the languages, she went into the classrooms where people were, and she was trying to communicate to them that there was a change of underwear if they wanted it. So, like the Pied Piper of Hamlet, she's going down the hallway in the school, and everybody was able to get at least a change of underwear. And one lady, I believe from Georgia, I'm not sure, but I'm sorry, it was you came up from Georgia, and the way it was related to me, she said, after people are, she said, excuse me, ma'am, but would you happen to have a pair of very large drawers? I think I got it right, honey, didn't I? Anyway, she was a very large woman, and of course there was no undergarments for her, so they managed to find it for her. So I just wanted to relate that, because that's one of the little things that people do. And finally, I'll finish with this, that, well, it was in this room, we had two, not this one, it was the first crew meeting, and there was, she was chief check pilot for American Airlines, a lady by the name of Beverly Bass, just an awesome, I think she's written a book, in fact, hasn't she? Pilots being what they are, the room was all filled with the pilots and co-pilots from all the aircraft, and we were trying to brief them what we're trying to do and how we were trying to do it. And they got a little bit, it wasn't all perfect and nice and smooth and calm, and they got a little bit antsy. Like, when are we going? And how are we going? Why did they go first? We came in first. And Beverly stood up, and I don't know how else to say it briefly, she chewed him a new asshole. And she, shut up, these people are doing the best they can. And just a wonderful lady, part of the crew. And you mentioned the crew, we had to have separated from the passengers because you needed your crew rest. And they wouldn't have been able to fly. Like the Aer Lingus pilot who we called up and said, it's your turn to go, start contacting your passengers. And he said, well, we kind of had a bit of a party last night, and I don't think we should be flying an airplane this morning. So anyway, that's it. Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity.
Jeff is being a little bit humble. Jeff said, I worked for the airport. Jeff was pretty much responsible for everything the airport did. So thank you, Jeff, for your little story. It's a little bit hard to see with the light. Do we have anyone else, or Matt, with a question? We'll take one or two more, then we have to conclude.
Thank you. Thank you. I saw an excellent article in the Toronto Star leading up to this anniversary where it describes how and why Gander was uniquely prepared to accept so many thousands of people coming in. And one of the reasons is that during the Cold War, you were used to getting defectors coming in from behind the Iron Curtain as they refueled en route to South American destinations, Caribbean destinations. You mentioned Cuba. Did any of these plane people claim political refugee status or defect here that anyone knows on the panel? Or were there any plane people who decided, you know what, I like this place, I might want to just stay here?
Well, personally, I haven't heard of any of the plane people who stayed. A lot of plane people have come back time and time again, made a lot of friendships. Some of them come back practically every year. I don't know if maybe some of them might eventually retire and buy a house here, but I think that answer might have to be unknown for now. I don't know if anyone on the panel might specifically know, maybe Des or Jean, but I haven't heard of it.
That because every passenger had to be accounted for the day they left here. And that's the only reason why the pilots were allowed to take off, because every passenger, we had no knowledge of anybody that requested this. No.
Okay, thank you. Do we have time for one more, or do we have one more question there? I really can't see. Okay, looks like, oh, there is one more. I thought I saw a hand.
Hi, thanks so much. Sorry. We are from Ontario, and we wanted to extend our trip to participate in this commemoration. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. But I do have a quick question for Bishop John, I believe it is. You mentioned that you had a video on your Facebook page, but we don't know what that page is. So if you can tell us where we can access it.
Well, yeah, it's not hard to find. My name is John Watton, and what'd you say, Jeff?
W-A-T-T-O-N.
W-A-T-T-O-N, John Watton. And the video is also on our drive, so you can download it. Links will be there for you.
All right, thank you, Bishop John. All right, so that concludes the night. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Can we give them a hand, everyone? The bar is open for a little while. I'm not sure if the gift shop is still open, but thank you all for coming. I know some of you have come from a distance, quite a distance for some of you. Some of you have come from British Columbia and the United States, maybe even farther adrift. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening.
comment about this program, we'd love to hear it. Email or call us, or send us your feedback through social media.
Hey, did you know?
More than 4,500 Canadians are waiting for an organ transplant right now.
Right now. 4,500.
People are dying.
And you could save a life. 90% of Canadians say they're willing to donate their organs.
But only a few are registered.
So what are you waiting for? Get registered.
It's easy and it's free.
Leave a legacy. Be a hero.
Save a life.
Find out how to register today. Go to kidney.ca.
Let's kick the tires and fight some fires. Motorcycle deploy. This is what we do. No city's too big. No pups too small.
You are a global superstar.
We're not done.
I believe I have the chills.
Sometimes it's hard to say goodbye to an old friend. But when you're saying farewell to your vehicle, Kidney Car makes it fast and easy. Just call or visit our website. We'll take any vehicle in any condition and give you a tax receipt for a minimum of $300. No headaches and no towing charges. It's the one-stop solution for getting rid of your unwanted vehicle in just a few short minutes. When your vehicles reach the end of the road, call us toll-free or visit kidneycar.ca.
Hi, I'm Mark Warren, and welcome to this special September 11th edition